Good morning, everyone else. Thank you so much for joining us in this panel discussion. I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm Mark Miller, Head of Bradford Research School, but hopefully you have very little for me in this panel, because we've got some real experts and system leaders from across Bradford to hear from. We're going to build on some of the ideas from the initial presentations from Catherine, from Anne-Marie, from our young people in tackling inequalities. We're back for us to start in our schools with our teachers. So the theme of our panel this morning is strengthening school leadership and improving access to high quality teaching. So in this panel of system leaders, they're all really well positioned to drive this school improvement agenda, and indeed they're doing so day in, day out. So without any more preamble from me, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And as we go, we're also going to hear their vision for what this theme of strengthening school leadership and improving access to high quality teaching actually looks like. So we'll start with my dear boss, Judith.
This is my work husband. Let's just break the ice to start with. So I'm here with several different hats on. I've got the privilege of leading teacher development across Dixon's academies and being well established there, having a long history there and seeing the lessons we've learned over time. But also in the last 5 years in particular, working with the EEF across the region really, including working quite intimately with many schools in Bradford, looking at effective implementation, probably about 100 schools in Bradford and about 100 more schools across the Yorkshire Humber region, including at all levels really, into system leadership, down to classroom teachers, or up from classroom teachers to system leaders and MAT CEOs. So I suppose some of my messages may be ones you might expect me to say, particularly through the lens of tackling disadvantage and using the evidence base to do that. Some of them may be simple and relatively naive, but I think what I'm hearing from the schools that we have worked with over the last 5 years or so in Bradford are the ones that are seeing real benefits in terms of developing rich teacher expertise and leader expertise, are the ones who have consciously thought about their implementation, slowed down, and truism number one, done fewer things better. So there's many of the things that I will say that will be quite general and abstract, but I am beginning to see evidence that those are the things that are making the difference. So in terms of strengthening senior leadership and school leadership and improving access to high quality teaching, you can't do justice to that in 2 minutes. Everyone will probably say the same thing. I would say it's possibly from the lens of sort of school culture and the culture of leadership, I would say it's about maybe breaking some old habits and developing some new ones. I would say that some of the old habits of leadership are things like 1 year school improvement cycles. They're things like new leaders running with projects that are new to them each year as a new leader comes into post, in isolation potentially. They're things like schools saying we're doing wellbeing or metacognition this year. They are things that are still valid, still relevant as processes, but don't help us embed and sustain leadership across our own schools. In terms of the new habits, I just identified probably 4 things. One of them is maybe a frame of mind, or be really conscious that actually the successful practices you have developed in your own leadership teams are ones that are aligned to what the evidence says about effective implementation. Many of us have really confident, conscious and successful approaches towards leadership, but we're not actually necessarily sure what they look like, and it's hard to articulate them and to pass them down to younger generations. So that frame of mind, I would say, number 1 is about really valuing unglamorous stuff that you do as a leader. Really glamorous things are shiny and attractive, but they aren't necessarily what makes the difference. One of the words that we use a lot with Dixon's hat on is, Sisyphean. It's the grinding nature of school leadership that actually makes the difference, because it provides the culture for all of our teachers to be able to teach and our students to learn. So frames of mind about maybe celebrating the unglamorous nature of school leadership a bit more. And also the second new habit would be prioritising the really deep-rooted barriers that we can control. We get distracted and easily tempted to be involved in many initiatives. Ones offered to us and ones that we are attracted to by our own natural curiosity. But I think focusing on particularly those barriers to do with reading and writing, not being distracted by as many things, and really focusing on those basics will be a more direct link to improving academic performance and life chances. The third new habit would be a shift in time frames, and I'm really conscious that most of the time we can't control the time frames that we work under, and external organisations don't help when they give you 1 year to spend X amount of money for an X project. I'm not trying to be political, but in many ways this is about politics and time frames as well. Schools talk now about having long explore stages, of having a long time rigorously planning things, pre-morteming them, stress testing them, making them so that it's much harder to go wrong. And all of those things take time. Hence my hesitance about 1 year improvement plans and cycles that are short-lived. So this shift in time frames does demand all stakeholders to understand that change takes time, and consolidation of consistency takes time as well. That said, I'm not pragmatic, I'm not idealistic enough to think that you can't work at pace on something. You can take the same principles and work them really, really quickly through a process, and sometimes you just have to do that and to act quickly. The final new habit, I would say, is one where we can learn a lot from our colleagues in care and the health research body in particular, is in the realm of evaluation. I don't think as schools we have the understanding or the tools or the habits of actually pausing and checking whether something has genuinely worked before we either ditch it or intuitively move on really quickly with something else that's more attractive. So thinking systematically, how do we know that this is going to work? How is it going? Is it working? And really intelligently thinking about that, I think, is something that is a challenge for the future. I haven't got time to talk about access to high quality teaching, but it's the same things. Prioritise the right things, understand the principles, and then ultimately enhance with a sort of cross-disciplinary understanding. And I think we can learn a lot from colleagues and vice versa, so that we have a really clear focus on the things that matter and use what evidence we do have to support us. I have no idea whether that was 4 minutes or 2, but I'm going to pass the baton now.
I think the whole session will just be everyone's 2-minute introductions, but I think they're also really useful to hear. So we'll pass on now to Matthew.
Great. I've got 3 things to answer. Those of you that know me know this is going to go very badly, very quickly. Okay, can I have my slides, please? Perfect. Right. Morning, everybody. I'm going to start just by prefacing this. I work at Bowling Park Primary School. I'm incredibly proud to work there. I'm incredibly proud to work with that community, with the team that I work with. It's not an exaggeration to say that our relationship and funding for the opportunity area has absolutely transformed our school. It's transformed our school at a whole series of different levels. From the experience that pupils have on a day-to-day through a huge funded project called the GEMA programme, and then all the way up in terms of professional development and leadership training, working with colleagues like Judith Kidd has made a huge, huge difference to us, and it really can't be underestimated. Right, it's not often you can start and immediately establish yourself as the most boring person in the room in one single sentence, but watch. When I started working for the Teacher Training Agency in 1998, this political issue, because it is a political issue, of teacher recruitment, of teacher development, of school leadership development, of school funding, gets kicked around like a political football. And it's interesting to know, and we'll see what happens soon, when things get tight politically, then this issue starts to raise up the agenda really, really quickly. There's a really clear fundamental point here, that our kids, especially in places like ours, deserve access to the very, very, very best professionals. Now, later on, if somebody asks me who Derek Champion is, he's an important part of the story. That isn't him, but you get the idea. Okay, I think my fundamental point is that national policies, they may be fine, might not be fine, but my question is, does one size really fit all? And are we looking at a tale of two cities? Now, that's not for a minute to suggest that schools in other locations, in less disadvantaged areas, are easier. They're just different. So it really is a case of two Everests, you know? But there's no question. In my area of BD5 and BD4, the challenges that our children face are enormous. About 75 to 80% EAL, about 50% free school meals, and that's an underestimate. About 25% of our 700 children are Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, Roma. Access to quality housing where we are is through the floor, and the pandemic swept through that community in a particularly tragic way. Throughout all of that, our school was resolute and worked incredibly hard, and did that because we had an absolutely superb staff team. I don't think one size does fit all. I think that teachers that work in schools like mine, that teaching assistants and support staff that work in schools like mine, and school leaders that work in schools like mine and like ours are actually really specialists. They're not just very good and excellent leaders or very good and excellent teachers, they're much, much more than that. And I don't mean that in a cliched way, that they are more giving or more caring or more nurturing. They may happen to be all of those things, but also they have to be resilient and respond to huge amounts of pressure and huge amounts of personal and social challenge around them. So I really think that when we look at this as a professional area, that really good teacher recruitment, that really good teacher development, that really good leadership development, that really good retention, it is the foundation of school improvement. And it is the foundation of school improvement, and it's the foundation of pupil progress, and it's the foundation of children being able to achieve in the way that they should achieve. Now, so I don't think necessarily a strategy that might fit, let's make somewhere up, Sussex, for example, necessarily meets the very specific needs of my community, of our community, in my case BD5 and BD4, but the wider inner urban area of Manchester, of Bradford. And I think there's some specific things to think about, just as questions, right? We have to actually understand the complexity of the place that we work in. And that's why the opportunity area has been so incredibly important, and the Alliance for Life Chances will continue to do the same. We have to understand what the shape of the challenge is, because it's different. The challenges that my families and children face is different to those in other places, and that can change within just a matter of miles. We have to understand the community that we're working with and working alongside, and sometimes representing not just the families and the children, but also the community within our schools. How much untapped excellence is there in, for example, support staff who didn't have the opportunity of going to university and securing higher education places, but are fantastic professionals in their own right. When I worked in London all those years ago, one of the best things we did in the heart of an absolute recruitment crisis storm was began a degree training program for 360 teaching assistants across Newham and Tower Hamlets in East London. That was a transformative project. It certainly was for those people involved, and it certainly was for the schools involved. The other thing then is characters. People who can tell a story. That's why Anne-Marie's important. That's why Catherine's important. That's why all of you are important. People who can tell a story that people believe in, of why it matters to be here and be excellent in being here. And then capacity, quality, I tried to squeeze there, and this notion that there's no short-term fixes to this. If I started doing this in 1998, and generations have done it before me, this is just about developing and sustaining excellence. And what ultimately makes the difference is having the right people in the right place, with the right support and the right ambition. So I know you'll be cheeky now. Tim Brickhouse created a project that was a precursor to the London Challenge. And I think we should be thinking on the same sort of scale as the London Challenge. We're not going to fix this. However hard we work, individually, we're not going to fix this. This is a huge collective effort. So my question is, do we need a model of teacher development for challenging urban environments? I think we do. I think it should be really well resourced. I think it should be excellently delivered, and the potential is huge. I'm going to end, I know I'm taking time, so I apologise. Tim Brickhouse, what do good school leaders do? It always seemed to me that urban school leaders are perpetually carrying out, often simultaneously, 6 activities. First, they create energy by talking with, not about staff, by asking what-if speculative questions. Second, they build capacity. Thirdly, they always extend the vision by listening to others and then adding their ideas to the vision. by asking why not, by circulating stories and speculating about possibilities. Fourthly, they seek and chart improvement relentlessly. Fifthly, they secure the environment. Finally, they minimise risk for others by taking the blame when something goes wrong, by reminding people of all the good things, by talking of the future as well as the present, and by ensuring that people feel appreciated whenever they do things well. They act in the world as mediators and ambassadors for children. That's written, I suspect, 20 years ago, but I think it still stands now. That's it, I think I've run out. Yeah, so that's that. Thank you very much. I'm well over, I apologise.
It's alright, I've completely lost control of this panel. It's absolutely fine. And Paul, don't feel that as a warning to speak briefly when you hear everything you've got to say. So next up is Paul Butler.
I am going to be shorter, actually. You might be pleased to hear. You're probably not surprised with my current role. I'm going to focus in on teacher development as the focus of my vision. Now, we all know, and research backs it up, that the most important influence in a school is the teacher. The teacher will have the biggest impact on the children and young people that they support. They'll be the people who drive their attainment and progress and therefore drive their life chances, of course supported by their parents and community at home. But we also need to focus in on the school leaders, because actually you can have a school full of wonderful teachers, but without fantastic school leadership to coordinate the school improvement activities of those teachers and the other capacity within the organisation, then we're not going to develop great schools. So my vision is around investing in both the teachers and the school leadership through effective professional development. I think what's also important to think about is a few years ago we would have been talking about senior management teams within schools, and these days we talk about senior leadership teams. I think both those terms, management and leadership, are really important. You know, there's lots of training, lots of support around management, the implementation of policies, for example, within school, but giving leaders that space to think strategically, to innovate and think about what's best for their school, their community, and so on, is a really important space that we really have to find capacity to invest in to benefit our schools. So, much shorter.
Thank you so much, Paul. Again, such a rich offer of professional development within Bradford, and I guess if we have a bit more time we can hear more and more about that later. Shirley, pass on to you.
Thank you, Mark. So scripted line, because those of you who know me best know that I do tend to talk too much. So good morning, I'm Shirley Watson, CEO of Barefoot Trust. So I'm going to take the question from left to right to start with. So we'll start by saying that to me in the future, Bradford and beyond lies in the sharing of research and intellectual capital that can move us beyond the ideological reductionism and turf wars that have held us back in our sector for far too long. My ultimate vision is that every civic leader should climb out of their siloed trenches and purposely come together to systematically identify high leverage, measurable strategy that we all commit to. Good intention and a thin spreading of short resource will not change Bradford. The right to high quality teaching for every child and young person, and the right for every teacher to deliver it, is central to our vision at Barefoot Trust, where we strive to put the research-informed, inclusive classroom at the heart of all we do. With consistent routines, a calm and orderly climate can be established so that all teachers can teach and diverse learners can learn. Reducing cognitive load for adults and young people has never been more important. In all schools, regardless of context, the explicit teaching of clear and simple rules for behavioural expectation is vital for all to enjoy, learn and succeed. I'm proud to say that our aligned principles for teaching and curriculum are equally owned by special and mainstream leaders without any our buts. Learning a shared body of knowledge is an entitlement, and we are equally ambitious for all our learners. There are no excuses for any child being left behind, and we know that the only true measure of inclusivity is high attainment for all. Teachers are not born, they're developed, and hence weekly coaching must be as much the right for adults as access to high quality teaching and knowledge-rich curriculums for all young people. Indeed, one is predicated on the other. With clarity and simplicity of active and pedagogical ingredients, instructional coaching and deliberate practice will enhance the delivery of all, for all. We are all here to learn. So how do we strengthen leadership? I know that despite my considerable privilege, I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for leaders who saw more in me than I ever saw in myself. Some of them are here today. Everyone needs a champion and a mentor, most notably those who face structural inequality and everyday prejudice. We must be intentional in our inclusion of diverse talent. This is both a moral and a business imperative. For leaders, there is much to learn about what to do, yet more importantly, how to be. Leaders like teachers must have right to weekly coaching and access to an annual training programme which focuses on evidence-informed domain-specific knowledge, but yet, just as importantly, develops vital leadership attributes, such as listening for meaning. In a world that can't stop talking, our future depends on being silent, particularly to hear the voice of the unheard. My belief is that coaching and mentoring comes in many guises, and that all leaders, particularly those who no longer deliver in the classroom, me included, should actively seek out advice and guidance from those who might just save us from ourselves by speaking truth to power. If we are never uncomfortable with our feedback, we're asking the wrong questions in the wrong places, and our ego fragility will undoubtedly impede our growth. As so many business analysts now recognise, the companies that make the soft stuff, the hard stuff, are the ones that will thrive in the latest New World Order. Finally, we grow by watching others, and I've been incredibly fortunate to have learned from the best. Andrea Jenkins, please note, to strengthen school leadership, we must demonstrate high personal standards of behaviour before we demand the same of others. Nobody did that more than Jeremy Richardson, who was tragically taken for us on the 23rd of June. He was a leader who walked the walk. So today, I end by saying what I know he would have said in response to today's question, and with much more brevity. We strengthen leadership and we improve teaching by keeping it simple and doing it brilliantly. Beckford Thornton is today, and will continue to be tomorrow, the tangible proof that he did just that. We must all strive to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley, and thanks for that lovely sentiment to end into your vision. I will end this section here, last but not least, with Michael. You were saying maybe everyone will say all the things you might want to say, but I'm sure you can add to your vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got the easy job of just what they said. Yeah, I'm Michael McCarthy. I'm the Chief Executive of the Priestley Academy Trust, which is 6 primary schools in Manningham, in the centre of Bradford. And I think I'm going to agree with everything that's been said, but I would start by saying I think school leadership has never been stronger. I think what everybody has been through, and I'm not just saying that because some of my leaders are here, what been through over the last few years, the leadership that has been put in place overnight, the food banks, the curriculum changes, the safeguarding calls, the doorstep visits, everything that went in, it was a whole new set of leadership skills that probably people didn't even know they had. So I think we're starting from a really strong place, and I think that's important to note. We're not having to start from the bottom. But what it has meant is that leaders are, for the want of a better term, feeling it now and are weathered by it, and it's really tough. So I think system leaders, where possible, we must remove the noise. There is so much noise. There is, we're trying not to be political, but there's so much change, there is so much going on, that actually we need to just strip that back and look at what is right for the children in front of us. And the leadership that we talked about, we're not just talking about the people at the top of the chain, we're talking about the teachers who are leaders of learning within their schools. Do what's right for the children and the young people across Bradford. I mean, I'm not from Bradford, you can probably get that from my accent. I've only just come to Bradford in September, but I'm blown away by this. I worked previously in an opportunity area somewhere else in the country that shall not be named, but there wasn't half of the things going on that you have in Bradford. It's unbelievably impressive. And we have a real opportunity to strip back all of that noise, concentrate on what's right for the young people of Bradford and really put that in place. And we've been talking just within our trust about that sometimes that doesn't look great. Sometimes it's not it's not the shining star that people would see. But if you deep down know it's right, then that's going to be the most important thing, because the children and young people of Bradford deserve the very, very best, as was said earlier on. So my job is a bit easy because most people had said things, but I think I'm starting from the point of it is really strong. There is a lot here, and there's a lot of opportunity to build on.
Thank you. And I think that's another really great message to end with, the absolute strength that is in this room in Bradford schools as well. I found some themes from some of those, apart from the odd political comment throughout. There's 7 themes that I think everyone can tend to agree on. So good leadership is difficult, and sometimes we need to embrace that messiness through it and stick to our guns. We need to focus on our context and what it means to be in Bradford, but also what it means to be in our area of Bradford and in our school with our teachers at this place and time. And we need to develop our leaders and our teachers, ensuring inclusion and diversity. And I love that coming from you, Michael, remove the noise. And I think a big part of what we need to do is to remove as much noise as we can. I'm sort of looking at DFE, Alliance for Life Chances, everyone to say that we need to think about what we can do next. So with that in mind, I primed you with a couple of questions. I think the first 2 we've covered in the opening statements, really. I really want to think about the idea of what can we do to ensure our visions are really fulfilled. I want to focus on the idea of how we develop our teachers and how we also develop our leaders. And I know those things are not necessarily always the same. So my question to the panel, and I'll ask this first to you, Paul, if that's okay. What's the professional development that can have the biggest impact for teachers and leaders in Bradford? And I guess, what should we be doing if we want to help everyone to develop in the way that we want them to?
I'll start off with something quite generic and then become a bit more precise, I think. One of the things we did a few years ago is we took 115 aspiring head teachers and 53 aspiring executive head teachers down to London to visit a group of schools. And the power of visiting those schools was the confidence that those school leaders developed, confidence in what their school already had in place. Yes, the Ofsted grids didn't reflect the profile of the schools down in London that we were visiting, so in terms of the Bradford grids, but actually what we became increasingly clear on over the multiple cohorts of visits were actually standards are very high in terms of the quality of leadership and the quality of teaching, but Bradford has these big challenges as well that it needs to be overcome, and it needs to overcome with time. So to improve teachers and leaders' confidence in what they already have established, I think is really important. Shirley's already mentioned instructional coaching. So if we're going to come from a research perspective, instructional coaching is the form of teacher development that has the greatest impact, or the most robust evidence base, to be a bit more precise. Now, if we're talking about instructional coaching, what we're talking about there is coaching to improve teaching. So working on a small aspect of a teacher's practice to help them to enhance that and improve their delivery of a technique, an aspect of pedagogy in the classroom. So great to hear from Shirley's example there, that example of teachers engaging in weekly coaching. We see that now through the early career framework. That's been introduced for the first time this year. It's not always been a smooth process. We're all on an absolute journey there of introducing that, but instructional coaching is embedded within that. Now, embedding it just for early career teachers, those teachers in the first 2 years of a career, isn't enough. What we need to increasingly do is look at that practice, that form of teacher development, and roll that across the entire school. And again, I think that's what Shirley was talking about doing in her trust. So we really need to focus in on that. And of course, we're delighted that the opportunity area invested in developing instructional coaching. So we're training up 39 expert teachers at this moment in time, with a view to them supporting a total of 101 schools as the next academic year progresses. So I think we've got some real momentum there.
Thank you, Paul. If I can bring Matthew in, you talked about this sort of transformative journey your school's been on in the last few years. And I wonder if you can say a little bit about professional development, what's been done to help to develop you and your school leaders and your teachers?
Yeah, I've been at school for 13 years now, and head I think for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been a really long journey from a really, really challenging starting point to just the dignity of being a good school. And at the core of that has always been the idea that and it sounds so obvious, that quality teaching is the absolute centerpiece of a good school. The day-to-day, not grind, but the day-to-day creativity, the day-to-day relentlessness, the accuracy and the commitment that it takes. Progress in schools like mine is hard fought for and hard won. So I think there's a real thing that it's very important that we enable our colleagues to understand the complexity of what they're trying to do, and that we acknowledge the challenge of what they're trying to do, and actually that their job is incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. We had visitors to school post-COVID, and we have something as simple as context sheets that identify the range of need across a classroom. And at first glance, they can look like hospital wards because the level of need is so specific and so serious in many cases that the amount of information they have to understand to be able to operate effectively in that is massive. It's a really, really serious job. So the first bit, I think, in terms of really effective professional development is to acknowledge the starting point there, and that's where the instructional coaching element has been so important, because it gives colleagues, gives peers the chance to share that complexity, to share that creativity, and create day-to-day, minute-to-minute often, solutions and really good ideas about what the very best teaching looks like in that context. So I think it starts with a recognition of it's bloody difficult.
Seems to be a theme, thank you. I can go to you next, Michael, for your thoughts on the most effective professional development that we should be doing.
I agree with the comments around coaching. I also think the research elements, we're trying to bring research into our schools, and I think where we have groups of schools, and even where it's not a multi-academy trust, there is a lot of collaboration across Bradford, and a lot more than I've known in other areas. So for me, it's about the research and then sharing that to say, well, actually these things really work. There is so much power in that as a group that, you know, we can get, I suppose, 20 times as much information if we work as a group than we can as just one school. But I actually think it's also about empowerment in the classrooms and allowing teachers to be brave and empowering that, because sometimes the best development is just doing something and just trying. And if they're allowed to be brave, and sometimes it'll go wrong, and that's okay, but actually then sharing that becomes sort of research without the formality of research, and then sharing that across groups. That would be my idea of what the best way to do it would be.
Right, thank you. And if I'm allowed my own little opinion here, there's the wall at the end of the far hall there, there's research champion posters. So there's been a research champion program for the last couple of years, and it's exactly that kind of action research implementation that Michael discusses there. So you do get a chance to go and talk to some of the research champions, and I'll be back here a little bit later on. Right, I'll shut up for a bit. I'm going to go to Shirley next. So you mentioned instructional coaching. You can talk a little bit about that if you'd like to, or if there's anything else that you think would add.
Yeah, I mean, I think listening to what Judith said about, and I suppose it's where I ended about the idea of keeping it simple. For those of you who know me, I've worked with Judith, well, I did work with Judith for many, many years, and I think for all our intention, probably sometimes we made things a little bit too complex. And for the best will in the world, we were always trying to be, you know, precise and intellectually sophisticated, but maybe sometimes as a result, what we were doing was too complex, particularly for early careers teachers. So I suppose, to me, I've become more and more convinced by the simplicity of the idea of clear active ingredients and instructional coaching. And I think that the idea of sort of high leverage, focusing on one particular aspect of teaching and doing it and doing it and doing it until it's right. So I gave the example of Beckford Thornton. I know Judith and I were talking the other day about, you know, the best way to do coaching, the best way to do deliberate practice. You know, what is the best way. Our schools don't all do it in exactly the same way, but I have become increasingly convinced that what Beckford Thornton are doing is right. So they stick with one thing and they do it until it's absolutely 100%. So this year they've done forensic monitoring, and I have to say, when I was a head teacher, we had forensic monitoring, and I thought we were doing it really well. It is spot on, and it's such a high leverage ingredient of pedagogy that it impacts on so many other things as well. They started on cold call and they were like, no, we're not ready, we're stopping. That doesn't mean to say that teachers don't do cold call, but that will be the high leverage next year. So Jeremy's mantra, keep it simple, do it brilliantly, absolutely is right the way through the mantra, right the way through the organisation. It's live not nominated, and I think that is the power of instructional coaching.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I'll bring Judith in. I'm sure you'll have some other things to add, but what do you want to say?
Yeah, having tried to encourage Mark not to ask many questions, and now I'm really eager to agree with everything everyone said. Less noise, but more nuance, maybe, so that we have simple things, but we understand the why as well as the how, and really helping people to focus on the how by keeping it narrow. But what I do think is that the culture, professional development, has transformed in the last couple of years, even predating the NPQs, and they're doing a huge amount to strengthen it. There is a craft and a knowledge base that sits under effective teacher development, and less is more runs right the way through it all. So I think actually we're in a really good place, and nationally, obviously we've got the new National Institute of Teaching that's going to play a role in actually evidencing that base even more formally, and drawing on international research as well. So I think we know more about effective teacher development than we ever have done before, and it's optimistic, and we just need to hold on to less noise, more nuance, keep it narrow, and echo 100% everything everybody said.
Thank you very much. And that's, again, another really good message, because I think there's a tendency for us to just want to have lots and lots of activity, and that's the way to improve things, to do lots and lots of things, but one resounding message from the panel is to do fewer things better, be consistent, stick with it. I wonder at this point if this is a good time just to engage the audience a little bit, and if there are any questions from the audience, if you just pop your hand up and we'll take any questions from the audience around this theme about strengthening school leadership and teaching. Okay, I'm going to go to you. I don't know, we should have a roving microphone. If not, we've got a roving microphone. I might have to be the roving microphone. There we go. So this is a question for the panel.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask, in terms of school governors, what sort of challenges do you face in recruiting and keeping a diverse representation of school governors in your academy trust and in your schools?
Thank you. Shirley, do you want to start with this question?
One of my trustees is in the audience, so I do need to make sure that I answer this right, don't I? Hello, Amira. I would say that certainly in my experience that recruiting is easier than retention, and I'm as interested in retention for trustees for governors as I am for teachers and for support staff. And so to me, I think everything that we've said today applies to trustees to governors as well. So I think keeping it simple, thinking about workload, making sure that the relationship is absolutely transparent, having a training programme so that that trustees can also thrive as well. But it certainly is an issue, I would say, and I think one of the things that I'm always interested in is motivation. So why does somebody want to give off their free time? And I think there's lots of reasons, and I think that when you're trying to recruit trustees and governance, that you should really get to the bottom of the motivation, and that the motivation is aligned with the mission of the trust. And we are actually at Beckfoot Trust, shameless plug, we are actually looking for trustees at the moment, so if you are interested, I'm very interested in diverse talent, so please do get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the panel would like to comment on the idea of governance?
It's really important that your governing body reflects the community that it represents. We've made very good progress here. We learned a lot through COVID as well, in terms of how important school was in the community, more than we had realised, and therefore that our relationships with the community were stronger than we'd hoped. And it's in that milieu then, that network of people who are loyal to the community, who are loyal to the school, fundamentally are loyal to the idea, the very simple idea, that their children, our children, deserve the very best, has made a huge difference to us. So it has to be a diverse governing body because it's a diverse community. It's as simple and straightforward and as uncomplicated as that, I think.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm going to jump back out into the audience again.
He's enjoying this.
Thank you. Malcolm Tuck from Leeds Trinity University, Deputy Vice Chancellor. I'd be interested in your thoughts on how can we as providers of ITT support you on this agenda, particularly around improving teaching quality but leadership within our schools.
Right, who wants to take this one first?
Well, I think the first thing to say in terms of ITT is what a complex landscape we're in at this moment in time. Nobody really has a clear understanding of what partnerships look like in terms of initial teacher training. For those who are not aware, there's a re-accreditation process going on for all ITT providers across the country, creating massive uncertainty in the system. So I think what we'll probably see from September onwards, I hope, is a refocus on partnership working for initial teacher training, where those who are accredited increasingly work with those who have a strong track record of initial teacher training and have lots to offer. Those partnerships need to be rethought about and reconsidered. Does somebody else want to comment beyond ITT?
Do you want to say what I think about the partnership with universities? I think just to say, I was on a panel a few years ago with Michael Young, who was despairing of the fact that universities might end up not involved with teacher training because we don't want to, although I'm talking about instructional coaching and active ingredients, what we don't want to do is actually say that teaching is a production line. It is to me an academic pursuit and the highest academic pursuit that you can ever follow, and I think it would be a great shame if we lost academic rigour from university partners. So I think hugely important, but I know what you mean about, I don't really understand the landscape. Every so often I have to say to Judith, who's that and where do they fit in? Because it has become awfully complex, and that to me is not great. But it's so difficult, even for somebody in my role, to navigate the landscape. So I think, to me, let's go back to a bit more simplicity and partnership. But to me, there is absolutely a role for that academic rigour and academic partners in teacher training, and let's not dumb it down to being an apprenticeship. It is absolutely, it is a pursuit of excellence and a pursuit of academic rigour.
Thank you. Any other comments on the ITT landscape?
Just one immediate thought would be that, picking up on a theme that several have mentioned, understanding the challenges of urban context and disadvantage, and any academic and intellectual capacity that organisations such as yourselves, that we have such close working relationships with, anything you can bring to strengthen the knowledge base and the expertise in Bradford would be really welcome.
May I very briefly? I agree totally. It would be a tragedy, I think, if university-based ITT disappeared. Because in one way, it's the repository. It's a library, isn't it, of ideas and research, and knowledge and debate and discussion, and it's a shaping ground. It's crucial. The one really simple way to improve is to be able to proactively recruit the very best possible candidates into teacher training. To be able to communicate the fact that to work in schools and places like ours and areas like this and cities like this is a fantastic professional opportunity, and to be really loud and proud about how we do that. And to pick up the point that we've both made there, we are working together to create really specialist professionals in environments like this, and we should be incredibly proud of them and incredibly proud of what they achieve, and incredibly proud of the partnerships that produce that outcome. It's important.
Thank you very much. I think we'll do one quick answer to one quick question, and then we'll start to wind things up, just so I don't want to miss anyone over there, but you want the question?
Hi, I'm really interested in how schools can use systems and structures to try and remove the barriers to implementing instructional coaching, not for ITT students, because often that is built into their timetables, but for perhaps later career teachers. We've all seen the graph, and so just wondered what colleagues on the panel thought really about removing those barriers in schools and systems.
Thank you. Judith, maybe? Think you're good at this?
Oh, don't get me started. Creative use of time, I think, is the first thing I'd say. Just doing things differently. Why do we all have to do X or Y at the same time? Looking for opportunity. I think that's probably the place I would start, but also reinforced by what Shirley was saying. You have to understand the guiding principles. You've got to be really clear about those, and then the structures are just things that you have to overcome, but you've got to make sure that the principles are there.
I think the thing to say about time is minute by minute is massively important. And I know it sounds a little bit boring, but if you actually look at 1265, there is quite a bit of time in it if you plan it absolutely minute by minute and across the whole year. So it is absolutely possible to get weekly coaching in, and I live in a world of 1265 and it's possible.
Thank you. And maybe that does come a lot back to implementation as well. It's the kind of thing that isn't easy just to implement quickly. It's a thing that needs the whole school culture to almost be built around.
Yeah, it's interesting. The boring stuff for implementation is the bit that people often forget, and therefore that's what goes wrong. So if you don't know absolutely to the second what time your school day starts, you've got no chance of implementing coaching. And I know that sounds really ridiculous, but it absolutely is the case.
Thank you. So we won't take any more questions here, but I've had my 5-minute warning, so just bear that in mind, everyone. And so what I want to do is just finish up, and 55 minutes isn't a lot for us to cover everything we possibly could. Just got a simple question of sorts. Just looking forward to the future. So we have 30 seconds or so from everyone. I'll start with you, Michael. What do we see as the opportunities and the keys to success? So moving forward, what are the things we've got to look forward to, the things we should be doing, things we need to celebrate?
Thanks. I think there's some obvious things like the City of Culture on the horizon that we can really plan towards and make big. But actually this type of thing that's happening now, the opportunity is just huge. And like I said, I can see that from somebody coming into Bradford from the outside in September. I can see the difference and the opportunities for schools, for young people, for everybody. And so I think it's about grasping these opportunities. But I think, as we've said, distracting from the rest of the noise, keeping it simple, so finding the things within all of these opportunities that are going to work for our young people and our schools and our communities, and focusing in on those and being really clear about what it is that we're working towards, because there are a million opportunities. Clearly it's about which ones are right for us at this point and focusing in and taking that rest of that noise away.
Thank you. Shirley?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's interesting that the overlaps when you think about teaching. We talk about the one high leverage point. Increasingly, multi-academy trust schools are thinking about the one high leverage strategy, and then you basically move your resources in order to make that happen. I always think about Bradford, I started off by saying that thing about good intention and spreading of short resource too thinly. I think we do loads in Bradford, but I almost think we do too much. So surely there must be one thing that unites us all and that we could all do and do absolutely brilliantly that would make a difference to all of our young people. Not just the children in one trust or one school, right across the city. And of course that would probably hinge on some aspect of tackling inequality.
Thank you, Shirley. Paul?
For me, we need to invest in partnerships going forward. We've had a great opportunity through the opportunity area, £13 million worth of investment, I think Catherine mentioned earlier. That's allowed us all to work together. That funding's probably not there going forward, unfortunately, but it shouldn't be about the money. It should be about committing the time to facilitate partnership working, because every school in this city has something to share, and there is dozens of schools across the city that are ready to learn from that school. So if we can invest in partnerships, I think that's going to help us all going forward.
Thanks, Paul. Matthew?
We're one of the youngest cities in Europe, and one of the joys of getting older and having been in a place for a long time is you can begin to really see the impact of the work that good people and good schools have done in places. So I have huge confidence in the younger generations that will step forward in Bradford and move the city forward, and I think there's a lot to look forward to in that.
Thank you. And finally, Judith?
Everything they've just said, and I just want to reframe that thing about less is more. It would be really great for us to feel that it was okay to say no to things. and that's a positive thing to do, that we choose the one partnership or the one project that actually is right for us, and do that deeply. I think if there's one thing I've learned working with so many schools in the last 5 years, is that the deeper the piece of work, the more impact it's going to have over a longer period of time. So less is more. Say no, and it's okay to say no to things. And you know, speaking as somebody who gets easily bored, it's a moral imperative that we do focus on fewer things better, and we should actually celebrate that rather than see it as a criticism. So I may not have articulated that very well, and it's actually echoing everything everybody else has said, but that's my mantra.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Thank you much everyone for joining us for this panel. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think our next one is on community engagement, which I think is very much in the same area of some of the things we talked about. So thanks very much to our panel speakers, thank you.